When my mother-in-law looked at my daughter's college application and said, "Harvard doesn't accept students like her," something inside me shattered. But what my daughter said next, what she said without raising her voice or showing a single tear, left everyone in the room completely stunned, including me. That moment is burned into my memory forever, like a photograph that captures not just an image, but the exact feeling of when everything changes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. We were sitting in my in-laws' immaculate living room with its pristine white furniture that nobody ever actually sat on, and crystal decorations that seemed designed to make visitors feel uncomfortable rather than welcome. The college applications were spread across the glass coffee table, and smiles that looked practiced rather than genuine filled the room. The house was decorated to impress. Expensive artwork, designer pillows, and those little decorative items that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. But beneath all that perfection, I could feel the chill. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have known better than to expect support from a family that had never fully accepted me or my daughter. My name is Emily. I'm 45, a single mother, who remarried, and now, through marriage, part of the Richardson family. My husband, Thomas, is everything his family pretends to be: compassionate, down-to-earth, and genuinely kind. He's the reason I ever stepped into their world to begin with. I met him when Lily, my daughter, was 12. Thomas fell in love with both of us. He always said we were his family from day one, and I believed him. The problem was, his family never did. They never stated outright that we didn't belong, never told me directly that I wasn't good enough. But they didn't need to. Sometimes rejection is louder in the things left unsaid. Sometimes it's in the way people barely look at you during conversation, or how they conveniently forget to include you in family photos, or how they mispronounce your child's name even after years of knowing her. That afternoon, it was a visit to Thomas's parents' home to review Lily's college applications. A casual family gathering to celebrate her future possibilities. Everyone had been invited. Everyone was expected to show up with encouraging words and practical advice. Lily was 17, articulate, ambitious, and always watchful. She wore the emerald green sweater I'd helped her pick out the weekend before, and tried to style her hair in loose waves the way her friends at school did. She looked so grown up, so hopeful. She didn't say it aloud, but I knew she was trying. Trying to be accepted, trying to fit in. I told her it would be fine. I told myself the same thing. And for the first hour or so, everything seemed normal. People made conversation about the weather, about traffic. Amanda, Thomas's sister, briefly commented on Lily's excellent grades, then immediately pivoted to talk about her own son's perfect SAT scores. Her version of a compliment always came with a subtle comparison. Thomas poured coffee, tried to keep the atmosphere relaxed. He mentioned how proud he was of Lily's essay. His father nodded politely. Eleanor, his mother, observed everything, like a critic at a performance she'd already decided wasn't worth her time. Then the discussion shifted to college choices, family legacies. Someone made a comment about the importance of alumni connections. And Eleanor, never one to miss an opportunity to remind us of our place, looked directly at Lily's Harvard application and said, "Well, Harvard doesn't accept students like her anyway." It wasn't framed as an opinion. It wasn't delivered as a joke. It was stated as an indisputable fact. Precise, intentional, casual, like she was merely pointing out an obvious truth that everyone else was too polite to mention. The words hung in the air. Thomas froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Amanda smirked slightly. Her husband suddenly found his phone incredibly interesting. And me? I couldn't breathe. I looked at Lily. Her pen hovered above the application form. She blinked slowly. Her shoulders tensed just enough to tell me she'd heard every syllable. And then she stood up. 17 years old. barely 5'4". But in that moment, she stood taller than anyone else in that room. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She looked directly at Eleanor and said something that would change everything. Something I'll never forget. Good, because I'd rather earn my way in than rely on family connections. It was calm, measured, devastating in its simplicity, and just like that, the room fell into absolute silence. That was the moment everything changed. Not just for Lily, not just for me, but for Thomas, for his family, for the version of our lives I had tolerated for far too long. The gathering wasn't meant to be dramatic. It was supposed to be a supportive session to review Lily's college applications, especially since Thomas's father was an alumnus of several prestigious universities. It was the kind of opportunity Eleanor loved to control, even though she contributed nothing of actual value. The invitation was extended in her typical manner, proper, slightly condescending, and performative. The kind that says, "We're having a family discussion about college, and appearances matter. Come prepared." We came, of course, because Thomas asked us to, because I still clung to the thin hope that if we kept making an effort, they'd eventually stop treating us like temporary additions to their perfect family portrait, that maybe persistence would eventually earn acceptance. I dressed in subtle navy, minimal jewelry, nothing that would draw criticism. Lily wore a sweater that matched her eyes, her hair carefully styled in a way that looked effortless but had taken an hour to achieve. Before we left our house, I could tell she was nervous, but she was trying to hide it. As I straightened her sweater in the hallway, she asked if she should call Eleanor Grandma. I hesitated. "Call her whatever feels comfortable," I told her. She nodded thoughtfully. "What if nothing feels comfortable?" I smiled gently. "Then you don't have to call her anything at all." That afternoon started the way so many family gatherings did, superficially pleasant. Thomas's younger sister, Amanda, greeted us with air kisses near our cheeks. All practiced warmth with no actual heat. Her eyes scanned my outfit, lingering just long enough to make me wonder if I'd made some unforgivable fashion mistake. Her husband made a comment about reaching for the stars and patted Thomas on the shoulder like they were old fraternity brothers. Lily sat beside me, quiet but observant, the way she always was around them. We weren't there 20 minutes before I felt the atmosphere shift. Eleanor barely acknowledged our arrival. Not a hug, not a thank you for coming, just a glance and a curt, "You're here." She spent most of the time talking about Amanda's children, what prestigious summer programs they'd been accepted to, the exclusive study abroad opportunities they were considering, the legacy universities that were already sending them recruitment materials. Every statement was a subtle reminder of status, a comparison. She never asked Lily a single question about her own accomplishments or dreams. Lily tried, she really did. At one point, she offered a thoughtful comment about a university's architecture program. Eleanor didn't even pause her conversation. When Lily laughed at one of Thomas's jokes, Amanda's husband gave her a look that clearly said, "Know your place." It was subtle, but Lily noticed it. She always notices everything. I could feel her starting to withdraw. Her voice became quieter, her posture more contained. The college brochures were displayed on the table, and the conversation inevitably turned to family tradition, educational pedigree. Our academic heritage, Eleanor called it, as if knowledge were a genetic trait passed down through monogrammed diplomas. That's when it happened. Amanda was mid-sentence about her son's early acceptance letters, and Lily, just trying to participate in the conversation, mentioned her interest in Harvard's humanities program. She did it quietly, respectfully. Eleanor turned her gaze to Lily's application, and with that same clipped tone she always used when pretending to be helpful, she said, "Well, Harvard doesn't accept students like her anyway." It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. Her voice was clear, calculated, as if she wanted to ensure the message was received. I felt my face flush hot with anger and embarrassment. My hands began to tremble. It wasn't the first time I'd been dismissed by her, but it was the first time she had directed that particular cruelty at my daughter in front of everyone, without even the pretense of good intentions. Lily froze, pen in hand, mid-motion. I could see the hurt wash across her face like a shadow passing over water. It lasted only a second, but I saw it clearly. Thomas looked stunned. His mouth opened slightly like he wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words quickly enough. Amanda busied herself with rearranging brochures, eyes averted. Her husband suddenly needed to check his watch, chewing the inside of his cheek. No one said anything, and that silence, that collective pause, was louder than any protest could have been. I reached across the table to touch Lily's hand, to reassure her, to pull her back from the edge of that cruel comment. But before I could even reach her, she stood up. She placed her pen neatly beside her application with the kind of deliberate composure you rarely see in someone her age. Then she looked directly at Eleanor, not with anger, not with hurt, but with something far more powerful: clarity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That was the moment I stopped worrying about what they thought of us. Because my daughter, my brilliant, perceptive, resilient daughter, was about to say the one thing I had never found the courage to say myself. And I knew once she did, nothing would ever be the same again. Lily didn't raise her voice. She didn't storm out or slam her hands on the table like a typical teenager might have. Instead, she stood with a quiet dignity, placed her pen beside her half-completed application, and turned to face the one person who had spent years subtly undermining her worth. Eleanor, Thomas's mother, her step-grandmother, and the woman who had just confirmed what Lily had suspected for years: that no matter her accomplishments, her character, her effort, she would never truly be considered one of them. "Good," she said, her voice steady as stone, "because I'd rather earn my way in than rely on family connections." Silence descended over the room like a heavy curtain. No one moved. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. Eleanor stared at Lily as if she didn't recognize the person standing before her, as if the words had come from a stranger and not the girl who had sent her birthday cards, thanked her politely for Christmas gifts she didn't want, and endured years of subtle diminishment just to keep family gatherings from becoming uncomfortable. But Lily wasn't uncomfortable anymore. She was done shrinking. "I don't want to be part of a system that values where you come from more than where you're going," she continued. "I've been trying to earn your approval since I was 12, and I'm finished. My accomplishments stand on their own." Her voice didn't waver. It didn't crack. She wasn't speaking to provoke conflict. She was speaking her truth. I could barely breathe. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not out of embarrassment, but out of something unfamiliar. Something like a mixture of fierce pride and profound relief colliding together. I looked at Thomas. His hands were gripping his knees. He wasn't looking at his mother. He was watching Lily, really seeing her in a way I hadn't witnessed before. Eleanor let out a small, dismissive laugh. "I didn't mean it that way, Lily." But Lily held her ground. She didn't allow the backpedaling. "You did. And even if you somehow didn't, you said it like you meant it. You always do." Amanda cleared her throat loudly, obviously trying to interrupt or change the subject, but the moment was too raw, too honest to be diverted. Lily turned toward Thomas. "Tom, I know you care about me, but you can't keep letting this happen." That sentence hung in the air like lightning before thunder. Thomas blinked. Something shifted in his expression, like Lily had awakened something dormant in him. He pushed himself up from his chair and stood. And then, in the steadiest voice I'd ever heard from him, he said, "You're right." He turned to Eleanor. "Mom, I've overlooked this behavior for too long, but Lily is my daughter, my family. And if that's difficult for anyone in this room to accept, that reflects poorly on you, not on her. Eleanor's mouth opened slightly. Nothing came out. Thomas wasn't finished. I've been so concerned about maintaining harmony that I've allowed you all to treat Emily and Lily like they were temporary additions, like they were constantly being evaluated. I should have addressed this years ago, and I'm sorry. He didn't raise his voice either. But for the first time since I'd known him, he fully embodied his role as a husband and stepfather without compromise. The people around the table didn't know how to respond. Amanda stared at the floor. Her husband checked his phone and muttered, "Well, I think we're probably done here for today." And that was the moment I knew we were free. Not because anyone apologized, not because the afternoon ended with reconciliation, but because my daughter had spoken her truth, and Thomas had finally supported her without qualification. We didn't need their validation anymore. We needed respect. Lily looked at me and asked quietly, "Can we go now?" I nodded. "Yes, let's go home." We gathered our papers. We left the house, and in a much deeper, more significant way, we left. Behind the belief that we ever needed to prove ourselves worthy to people who were never genuinely interested in seeing us in the first place, we didn't slam the door. We didn't make a scene. We simply walked out together. Me, Lily, Thomas right behind us. No one tried to stop us. No one called after us. There was no apology, no awkward attempt to smooth things over. It was as if the room had collapsed inward under the weight of truth finally spoken aloud. The kind of truth that continues to echo long after the words themselves have faded. I remember the sound of Lily's footsteps on the marble entryway, deliberate and measured. I remember reaching for her hand as we stepped outside, and how firmly she held mine, not out of fear, but out of finality, like something fundamental had shifted inside her that would never revert to its previous form. Thomas joined us just as we reached the car. He didn't speak immediately, just stood beside us, breathing deeply as if he'd been holding his breath for years. "I should have said something sooner," he finally said, his voice barely audible. I turned to him, emotionally drained but also strangely invigorated. "Why didn't you?" He looked at Lily first, then at me. Because I thought keeping the peace meant avoiding conflict. But I realize now, peace without truth isn't really peace at all. It's just suppression. That statement resonated more deeply than I expected because for years that's exactly what I'd done too. I'd played along. I'd smiled through criticisms. I'd made myself smaller around Thomas's family, telling myself I was doing it for Lily's sake. But in reality, I was doing it to avoid confronting a situation I never should have accepted. In the car, Lily was unusually quiet. I asked if she was okay. "Yeah," she said, gazing out the window. "I'm just done pretending their approval matters more than my own self-respect." And that was the moment it all became crystal clear. This wasn't simply about a college application. It wasn't just about a thoughtless comment. This was about dignity. About being exhausted from trying to belong where you weren't genuinely wanted. About establishing boundaries that should have been drawn years earlier. That evening, we didn't discuss what had happened at length. We changed into comfortable clothes. Lily worked on her other applications at the kitchen table. I made her favorite tea and sat across from her, just being present the way I used to when she was younger. Thomas joined us later with a stack of reference letters he'd collected from Lily's teachers and mentors, quietly placing them beside her and sitting down to help without being asked. Not as an outsider, not as a man caught between two families, but as a parent, finally and completely present in this family, our family. The next morning, Thomas sent his mother a message. Not confrontational, not bitter, just unambiguous. Until you can respect Emily and Lily as equal members of this family, we won't be attending family functions. We deserve better. He didn't ask my permission first, just did what should have been done long ago. She didn't respond. But the silence felt different this time. Not something to worry about or try to fix, but something that confirmed we'd finally established a boundary clear enough to be understood. In the weeks that followed, something subtle transformed between me and Lily. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet, like a room gradually filling with light as curtains are slowly drawn back. She carried herself differently. She smiled, more genuinely. She didn't ask if we would be attending the next family dinner, and I didn't pretend we might. I knew we wouldn't, because we were creating something new. Not flawless, not picture perfect, but authentic. I used to believe family was primarily about lineage, about who welcomes you to their gatherings. But that afternoon showed me something more profound. Family is who stands beside you when it's difficult, who speaks truth when it's risky, who chooses you even when it would be easier not to. That day, my daughter spoke with a certainty I hadn't known she possessed. And my husband followed her lead. And I finally stopped waiting for permission to believe we were enough. We didn't lose a family that afternoon. We found our true one. And perhaps the most powerful moment wasn't when Lily stood up and spoke her truth. Maybe it was when we walked out together, quiet, united, unapologetic, and free. We didn't discuss the incident immediately. The following day, I prepared breakfast as usual. Scrambled eggs with chives, whole grain toast, fresh fruit on the side. Lily came downstairs in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep. She sat down, thanked me, and began eating without mentioning what had transpired the previous day. But something had changed. There was a new steadiness about her, a confidence that hadn't been there before. It wasn't loud or showy. It was understated. A kind of inner certainty that comes from no longer needing external validation to recognize your own worth. Thomas joined us minutes later, still in his t-shirt, coffee in hand. The three of us sat, together, and for the first time in recent memory, the atmosphere felt genuinely light, not weighted with tension or unspoken thoughts, just comfortably present. That's when I recognized a fundamental shift had occurred, and it wasn't just about that afternoon or that house or that family. It was about finally refusing to participate in relationships where acceptance was conditional. For years, I had convinced myself that patience was the virtuous path, that if I remained kind enough, tolerant enough, made enough conciliatory gestures, eventually Thomas's family would soften their attitude toward Lily and me. I told myself I was setting an example of maturity, but in reality, I was asking my daughter to bear the burden of constant subtle rejection, and I hadn't even realized the full extent of it. That afternoon made everything clear. The long-held insecurities, the constant need for approval, it all seemed so unnecessary now. We focused on finishing Lily's applications, Thomas providing insights from his experience without trying to direct her choices. She decided to apply to Harvard despite Eleanor's comment, but now it was purely on her own terms, without seeking anyone's validation. 3 months passed. The atmosphere in our home lightened considerably. We celebrated small moments: Lily's debate team victory, Thomas's promotion, my art exhibit at the local gallery. Eleanor called once to invite us to a family dinner. Thomas politely declined, repeating the boundary he'd established. When Amanda sent a group text about her son's acceptance to Princeton, we responded with genuine congratulations, then continued with our day unaffected. The most remarkable change was in Lily. She walked differently, spoke with more certainty, and stopped second-guessing her decisions. She threw herself into her final semester, leading community projects, mentoring younger students, perfecting her applications. When rejection letters from 2 universities arrived, she read them thoughtfully, reflected on them, and moved forward without the crushing self-doubt she might have experienced before. Then one Tuesday afternoon in April, while I was grading papers in my home office, Lily burst through the door. Her eyes were wide, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling. "Harvard's admissions office just called. They want me to come in tomorrow, in person." My first thought was confusion. Harvard doesn't typically call applicants. They certainly don't request in-person meetings. Was this good news? Bad news? My stomach tightened with worry. "Did they say why?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Only that they wanted to discuss my application personally." The woman on the phone said they had some questions. Lily's voice wavered between excitement and fear. I called Thomas immediately. He left work early, and we spent the evening speculating about what this unusual request might mean. Lily barely slept. I heard her pacing in her room, rehearsing responses to imagined questions about her application. The drive to Cambridge the next morning was silent. Thomas offered to come, but Lily asked to have just me there. "Whatever happens," she said, "I want to handle it myself." The admissions building was imposing, all red brick and ivy, centuries of tradition embedded in its walls. We were ushered into a conference room where 3 people waited: Dr. Winters, the Dean of Admissions, Professor Abernathy from the Humanities Department, and Ms. Chen, an admissions counselor. Dr. Winters smiled warmly. "Thank you for coming." "In, Lily. We don't usually do this, but your application presented us with an unusual situation." My heart sank. I reached for Lily's hand under the table, but she had already folded her hands firmly in her lap. "We received a rather interesting phone call about your application," Dr. Winters continued, opening a folder. "Someone contacted us to suggest that perhaps your application contained exaggerations, particularly regarding your community project developing literature programs for underserved schools." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Someone had called to undermine Lily's application? The timing, the specificity, I immediately knew it had to be Eleanor or someone in Thomas's family. Before I could process this fully, Professor Abernathy leaned forward. "Normally, we wouldn't act on such calls. We receive them more often than you might think. However, the caller identified themselves as a close family member, which prompted us to look more closely at your materials." Lily's face remained composed, but I could see her knuckles whitening as her hands clenched tighter. "What we found," Ms. Chen said, picking up a different folder, "was quite remarkable. Not only did your project documentation check out completely, but when we contacted the school district coordinator, Ms. Perez, she sent us this." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were dozens of letters, from teachers, students, parents, all testifying to the impact of Lily's literature program. Photos of reading circles she'd organized, curriculum materials she'd developed, grant proposals she'd written, evidence not just of participation, but of leadership and vision, beyond what she'd even claimed in her application. "Ms. Perez was quite surprised we were calling to verify," Dr. Winters said, smiling slightly. "She told us, and I quote, 'If anything, Lily underrepresented her contributions in an effort to be modest.'" I watched the realization dawn on Lily's face, her expression shifting from apprehension to understanding. "We don't appreciate attempts to undermine worthy applicants," Professor Abernathy continued. "But in this case, the attempt had the opposite effect. It brought your accomplishments into sharper focus." Dr. Winters leaned forward. "Lily, we didn't ask you here to question your application. We asked you here to offer you admission to Harvard University with a full academic scholarship." The world stopped. Lily didn't move. For a moment, I thought she hadn't heard correctly. "Your application was already in our acceptance category," Ms. Chen explained. "But after this deeper review, we've decided to offer you one of our merit scholarships as well. Your work exemplifies exactly the kind of student we value at Harvard." I felt tears welling in my eyes. Lily sat perfectly still, processing what she'd just heard. "I have a question," she finally said, her voice steady. The person who called you, did they identify themselves by name? The three exchangers' glances. Dr. Winters nodded slightly. It was an Eleanor Richardson. She identified herself as your grandmother. Lily nodded, absorbing this information, without visible reaction. Thank you for telling me, and thank you for the opportunity to attend Harvard. I accept. We completed paperwork, discussed orientation dates, and shook hands with the admissions team. We were halfway to the car when Lily finally broke. Not in tears or anger, but in laughter. Deep, genuine laughter that seemed to release years of tension. Eleanor tried to sabotage my application, she said between breaths, and accidentally got me a scholarship instead. The irony wasn't lost on me. I joined her laughter, feeling lighter than I had in years. That evening we celebrated at home, just the three of us. Thomas was furious when he learned what his mother had done, but Lily stopped him from calling her. Don't, she said. This isn't about her anymore. And she was right. What had begun as an attempt to diminish Lily had instead revealed her true strength, not just to Harvard, but to herself. 2 days later, a formal acceptance package arrived from Harvard. Lily placed it on the coffee table without opening it immediately. I want to savor this, she explained. When she finally opened it, a note fell out, handwritten by Professor Abernathy. We look forward to welcoming a student who has already demonstrated she belongs here. We never told Eleanor about the scholarship. We didn't need to. When Lily's Harvard acceptance was published in the local paper, Thomas received a text from his sister. Mom's in shock. How did this happen? His reply was simple. Lily happened. Graduation came and went. Summer unfolded with college preparations and quiet family evenings. Thomas's family sent a generic card and gift. We acknowledged it politely, then continued, building our life without seeking their approval. The morning Lily left for Harvard, we stood in the driveway beside our packed car. Thomas hugged her tightly, then stepped back to give us a moment alone. I need to thank you, Lily said, her eyes meeting mine. For what? I asked. For showing me that sometimes the people who aren't supposed to believe in you teach you to believe in yourself. As I drove away from campus that afternoon, leaving my daughter to begin her Harvard journey, I realized something profound. We spend so much of our lives seeking validation from others, especially those who withhold it. But true freedom comes when we finally understand that the most important approval comes from within. Lily learned that lesson at 17, standing in a living room full of doubt. I learned it watching her walk away from that doubt toward her future, unhindered by others' expectations. If there's one thing I hope you take from our story, it's this. The people who try to convince you that you don't belong somewhere are often the ones most afraid of what will happen when you prove them wrong. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.